Добра вечер! Имаме ли пирати? Не, що за пиратски бар е това? Аз съм важен. Либертарианци имаме ли? Да! Няма други с някакви рандами, защото аз не знам каква друга тарги група.
Другите са SCP-те,
SPC-те. Добре, мили хора...
милионери.
А колко хора искат да правят преди биткоин?
Всичките. Ако ми подарят.
Добре, сега без да се притеснявате, кой не знае какво е биткоин?
Кой не знае?
Вече няма никой. Окей. Зак, I think your assumption is correct. So, днес имаме много интересен лектор, всъщност те са двама братия. По принцип, ако това е първи път, когато вие посещавате нашия Money Monday, концепцията е много проста. Веднъж месечно каним интересен лектор, който да ви говори за интересни неща в сферата на икономиката, личните финанси и най-вече как да инвестираме най-добре нашите пари, време в някакви интересни неща. В момента, това, което се е случило, говорихме за икономиката на пиратите, защото се правят с пиратите, говорихме си за златото и що за инвестиция е това. И сега модерното злато, може би може да наречем злато на 21 век, ще си говорим днес за биткоин. Разбрах, че явно всички знаят за какво става въпрос, така че няма нужда да обясняваме какво е криптовалута. Сигурно знаете, че имаше огромна експлозия тази година на стойността, след това имаше лек дроп, след това пак. Като цяло, криптовалутите са новия клондайк. Както хората са заебавали, всички са отишли в Запад да купаят, така в момента хората всички спестявания инвестират в биткоини в купачки. Сега, колко е разумно, колко не, ще видим, но всъщност днешната тема ще е за малко по-адванс биткоин хора, защото ще си говорим за нови концепции, ще си говорим за нещо, което е супер иновативно. Всъщност нашия гост-лектор има компания за биткоин ATM, т.е. нещо, което е супер виртуално и ефемерно, с нещо, което си як хардуер, може да си изтеглиш паричките, може да си изтеглиш wallet на живо. И ще бъде супер интересна лекция и моля ви да се притеснявайте да задавате максимално много въпроси. Лекцията ще бъде на английски, като ще се опитаме при нужда да има и превод на някои неща, ако има неясноти, но като цяло основно се движиме с английски. Ако някой има нужда да помощ с въпрос за превод, има кой да асистира, но цяло ще се справим. Добре, сега прескочвам на английски. So, basically, I introduced you and your company. I think it's going to be a very interesting lecture, and we're going to expand the horizons of what Bitcoin could be and could transform to be. And I think your idea about ATMs really brings Bitcoin to a more tangible level that people could really accept it as much as they accept debit and credit cards. Maybe, or maybe not. You tell us. Welcome, Zach. And Josh. Are you Johnny?
All right, are we online? All right, well, thanks for inviting me, and apologize for not speaking in Bulgarian, but you would not enjoy that. So Stoyan asked me to come talk because we had some talks back and forth about how Bitcoin is a really powerful libertarian idea. And I think it's sometimes people kind of forget about what Bitcoin's all about when you just see the price going up and up, and everybody's about the price. And oh man, you know, I should have bought when it was at 6,000. I should have bought when it was 2,000. And kind of lose the idea of what Bitcoin's all about. And to me, the price is almost the least interesting and impressive part about Bitcoin. And what's really fascinating about Bitcoin is the underlying technology and the ideas behind it. So in the Genesis block of Bitcoin, the very first block of Bitcoin, the creator or creators of Bitcoin, called Satoshi Nakamoto, left a little note which said, "Chancellor on brink on second bailout for banks." And this was in the UK Times, in the Times. And that kind of gives you an idea of what was going through his head, the creator of Bitcoin, when he put it out there, which is kind of like, take this, guys. And it's the idea of you have all of this centralized control around all of the banks the central control of all these financial institutions. And whatever you try to do politically, whether it was Ron Paul with Audit the Fed, or any of the other initiatives that libertarians over the years have been trying to push to make any kind of change, there were no changes. And if you kind of look at the innovation of the internet that's been happening since the mid-90s, that's changed so much about everything we do, and how we communicate and how we gain information, yet it's changed so little about the financial institutions that we use. It's changed so much about the banks to the point where the only thing that's really changed in the banks the past few hundred years is that we have these kind of, little shitty websites where you can play with things and kind of use the same system, just do it online. But it really hasn't moved much compared to the innovation we've seen in all of the areas that are less regulated or a lot less regulated. And so I think it's important to look back at some of the concepts of Bitcoin and how important this concept of decentralization is for institutions and what it can really do as far as libertarian ideas. And one of the things that's hard for us libertarians is you talk to people and you try to use logical arguments and you try to use common sense, but then you always kind of hit this wall of people saying, no, you just hate the poor, and you have to take taxes for people because otherwise people will not give any charity, and they have these ideas that are based on emotional concepts, and it's really hard to get past that with arguments, and it's really hard to get past that as far as politically. As far as the political ambitions, it's really hard to get over that hump of that's what the mainstream in a sense want to see, these concepts that are really easy to get forward of. Let's just help the poor by giving them some money from the rich. And so when you take away the concentration of money from the government, when they're not the ones producing money, when they're not the ones regulating the banks, and when every single individual person has more control over their funds, then the idea is, well, what do you person actually want to do with this? How are you going to help your situation? How are you going to help other people's situation without this idea of the government having full control over the institutions of money and finance and banks, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why I think this gets really interesting from a standpoint of what are the actual demonstrated preferences of people. Where do people actually want to put their money? Not through voting in some kind of political system, but what do you actually want to do with your money? What are your real choices that you have? You worked very hard for money. What do you want to do with it? And I think that's something that when you imagine a system that's built on distributed institutions, decentralized institutions, and decentralized money that's not politicized and that's not affected by huge corporations and their ability to get governments to regulate the industry, I think people will have a lot. It's kind of a true democracy. It's what is your choice at this given moment, and what do you want to do with it? And in fact, the very first people that were excited about Bitcoin were the libertarians. And this was at a stage where Bitcoin wasn't anywhere near 10,000, and everybody treated it as a joke. And yet, in these small libertarian communities, it was the coolest thing ever. And this wasn't because anybody thought they were actually necessarily going to be wealthy because of it, just because they saw the potential of what it could actually be. And I remember we were at, there's this crazy libertarian festival in New Hampshire every year called Pork Fest. Now it's Pork Fest with a C, not with a K, so it's not just a lot of pork. It's actually short for porcupine, which is it's a very impressive libertarian festival in the New Hampshire woods. I think, what is it, about 1,200 people every year just go up to the woods of New Hampshire and celebrate liberty. And it was back then in 2012 that all of the vendors selling, whether it was food or drink or jewelry, and they were already starting to accept Bitcoin. And they would also accept silver or perhaps even small amounts of gold. But this was the first time that I actually got to see how it works and what it feels like to use this this imagined technology to send money from one person to another without any kind of institution in between, digitally. And in the same ease that I could sell, somebody was selling me a hamburger at PorkFest, I would be able to send that money to China, and it would cost me the exact amount of money. So that was truly fascinating, and so within these libertarian communities, that's where Bitcoin really started its initial growth. And a lot of the people that are big names in Bitcoin today, for instance, Roger Ver learned about it from Free Talk Live, which was a libertarian talk show based in New Hampshire. And they talked about it all of the time, and that's kind of where the core of Bitcoin really started building up, was in these libertarian communities. And then eventually, with time, it started getting into communities that weren't as hardcore libertarian. And some of those communities also, had a lot of money. And so that's when, Bitcoin really started booming. But there are really a few ways, there are many ways, but there are a few interesting things that I've learned over the years of how Bitcoin can be powerful for the libertarian ideology. And just as a funny example, when we first showed our prototype of our Bitcoin ATM, it was just the first time ever. It was in Washington, D.C., in a Students for Liberty International Conference. This was 2013. And the Bitcoin price had just hit 30, which was a big deal because it had never hit 30 before, and or 35 or so. And it was low for the whole year, so it was really going for a new rise. And as that was happening, we had one of the, an 18 or 19-year-old libertarian kid that time, and he said, "Hey, I just became a Bitcoin millionaire." If he had, I don't remember, fortunately I don't remember who he was, because but if he had held on to all of his Bitcoins from then, he'd be worth somewhere around $300 million. And this is a 24-year-old libertarian kid. So why is this important? Because anybody that invested, all of these hardcore libertarians that invested in Bitcoin early on, now have the resources to go and put that back in to more libertarian ideas. Now, I don't necessarily think we need a lot more think tanks in the libertarian world, but we do need a lot more startups. And we need a lot more people pushing this exact kind of technology. And if people now have enough money to do that, I think that's when we'll start seeing the really big changes in ideas to move the libertarian forward in ways that we couldn't have had in the past. So if, up until 5-6 years ago, it was like, well, do we go and we're libertarians, should we try going the political route? Should we start a think tank? Should we put out more publications? And now you have, the crypto market cap of $250 billion with ideas that are almost all libertarian. And I think that's incredibly powerful. And something that's worth thinking about as libertarians. And one of the things to think about is, as a libertarian, is, well, have I used Bitcoin? Have I tried it? It doesn't have to be an investment, but I think understanding it is almost a necessity if you consider yourself a lover of liberty in this world. So that's kind of the intro. And now, if you guys have any questions about Bitcoin, or Bitcoin and libertarianism, or about our machines, I'd be happy to field them. Slavcho.
Thanks, Zach. Yeah, actually it wasn't that much technical. It's a little bit about the effects and the fundamentals behind Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
Just a few days back, the CEO of Bitcoin Cash gave an interview for RT where he claimed that Bitcoin is probably the biggest threat to governments worldwide. For them to collect taxes, because they can't just, claim that I'll collect my taxes in Bitcoin, thank you very much, because they won't be able to trace the money to whomever it's sent. And he claimed, I remember, no money can be forced, no money can be taken. Those are the 4 words that he summed up this whole thing and this concept about Bitcoin. Do you think there are many truths into his statement? Well, first of all, I don't think
The CEO of Bitcoin Cash. I think that was like a...
He also founded the Swedish...
Falkvinja? He was being cynical. He's not the CEO of Bitcoin Cash. It's...
Zach, can you just please repeat some version of the question?
Okay. So Slavcho, right. Slavcho unfortunately doesn't have a microphone. and he was asking that Rick Falkvinja said that Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash will eventually turn taxes into voluntary because governments cannot force people to take the Bitcoin because they don't hold the private keys. I would say that's not entirely true, unfortunately. And the first thing is that Bitcoin is still not completely anonymous. There are other cryptocurrencies that are working on it, such as Monero and Zcash. But you could say the same thing about cash, right? You can bury your cash and have it, and the governments can say, you give me your money, and you're like, I don't have it, I don't know where it is. And then they can use their guns and seize everything you have and put you in a prison. So if they wanted, if at that kind of threat, they will be able to take the money from you if they think that you owe it. Now, you could say, oh yeah, but what if I properly hide it so they don't know that I have it? But then you can't spend it, because if you're spending it, they'll know that you had it. So, I think it's wishful thinking at this point that Bitcoin will completely abolish taxation. But I do think that it will have a huge impact of the state's ability to manufacture money. And if the state can no longer just print money, and if the state can no longer have full control over that money via the central banks, then they'll have to think of more responsible ways of handling money, and I think that may have to start with lowering taxes. And then eventually, I think that the taxation model will have to change, kind of in the same way that that record companies have to change their business model because people are using Pirate Bay and BitTorrent to download songs. They have to, they have to work harder for it and take less. Yes.
So obviously central banks have big incentive to stop the development of cryptocurrencies because it's kind of their enemy of their control over money.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you think this will play out? Central banks could unite their powers to stop currencies.
Right. So the question is if central banks can unite their powers to stop Bitcoin. I honestly don't think that politicians have that ability to cooperate on that level. I've never seen politicians of different states kind of cooperate together on one thing. But I think even if, excuse me, I think even if they tried, it would be extremely difficult. And they'd have to try some kind of attack on Bitcoin. And it would require so much money at that point, and then what would they be trying to say? Like, we have to attack Bitcoin because otherwise, we're going to be replaced? I think it's a hard argument, especially when you have more and more people that are investing in Bitcoin. And these aren't just, the regular guys on the street. You have everybody's investing in Bitcoin now. You have institutions investing in Bitcoin. You have Wall Street investing in Bitcoin. I think it's something that's kind of it's too late, if you ask me. I think it's too late for this kind of thing. And even if they are able to injure Bitcoin in some way, you still have all these other cryptocurrencies. So what are you going to do? You're going to keep putting money into trying to destroy every single blockchain at a time? They're going to run out of money really quickly, and the underlying technology, I think, will prevail.
Can they just ban the Bitcoin exchanges, which exchange Bitcoin for fiat currency, and this way they can essentially...
Well, that's exactly what China did, and it brought the Bitcoin price down for about a week. And now it's like 5 times higher than it was then. So if China tried it and that was the effect, forgive me if I don't feel that threatened by that possibility right now. They could, but it would come at a political cost as well. I mean, people want to know why. Like, if the United States of America decided to close down all the exchanges, it wouldn't go down so quietly. Yes, Arkady.
What do you do when the CEO of JP Morgan says that Bitcoin is a balloon and it's a scheme? What should we do?
Ignore him. I think that's what pretty much everybody's doing. Right. Well, so far, right, not listening to him has paid off pretty well. Listen, the thing about the Bitcoin price is it really could go in any direction right now. It could go down to 2,000 tomorrow. And it doesn't matter, because what's most important about Bitcoin, again, is the underlying technology, what it's able to do. And the price is a reflection of a lot of things, and not all of them are part of what makes Bitcoin great. So a lot of it is the general hype. You know, people see the price going up, and there is really this kind of, I guess it's a fear of missing out, where people are just rushing in and like, Bitcoin's going to go to 100,000. I want to become a millionaire, and I don't want to miss out again. I wanted to buy at 2,000. I wanted to buy at 5,000. But that honestly, it could be anything, and most people don't really understand the underlying technology of Bitcoin. So, you know, it's the price could go up or down at any point. But I think Bitcoin is definitely, or cryptocurrencies at the very least, are definitely here to stay. Yes.
Okay, so what exactly is the concept of a Bitcoin ATM?
Okay.
What exactly is that?
So the question is, what's the concept of Bitcoin ATM? And the concept is, how do we make it as easy for anybody off the street to buy Bitcoin? And so what are the options that we have? One option that we have is, well, I can meet a stranger in a dark alley, and they can, you know, say, would you like to buy some Bitcoin? And I have to worry about, you know, what's their reputation? What are they going to charge? It's what if they decide to rob me and just take my cash or my Bitcoin, whatever I'm trading? And what we do is we put that into a machine, into a kiosk. So we have a very friendly user interface. We make it very simple for people to understand how to buy their Bitcoin. All they need is a QR code. They go up to the machine, they scan their QR code into the machine, they put in the cash, and 5 seconds later they left with their first Bitcoins or second Bitcoins or whatever.
Actual physical ATM machine.
It's a physical machine, yes. It's a sexy machine, but it is physical, and it's very inviting. So when you have something as intimidating as a digital currency, and you're taking your cash that you're so familiar with, that you worked hard for, and you're putting it into a machine, and nothing's going to happen, it has to be friendly. You have to believe in it. You have to put a certain amount of trust in that machine, and so it helps to have these machines that you know are trustworthy. And that's something we've built up over the years, that people know that that the operators of our machines will work as intended, and they put it in, and a second later they just see their phone light up with the Bitcoin, and it's kind of a wow moment. We've had a lot of cool people who have used our machine for their first Bitcoin, and that's how they got it. And we've talked to people. We just talked to an Italian investor a couple of months ago, who is now a Bitcoin investor. He invests in Bitcoin companies. He invests in Bitcoin, and he wasn't sure about Bitcoin until he went to one of our machines and used it, and that's where he got his first Bitcoins. And so he may have just put in 20 euros in there. But it was that experience that showed him that there's something to this technology. And that's why I would love for everybody to use our machines, but I would definitely suggest that to anybody that's just about to get into cryptocurrency, to try it out with a small amount first. So to somehow get your hands on 5 or 10 or 20 leva or euros worth of Bitcoin, and just send it to a friend, play around with it, understand what you're actually doing, and then try to see if that's something that you want to invest a larger amount of your wealth in. I do think that it probably at this point is a good idea to put a certain amount of savings into Bitcoin, just because I think that there's a risk in not doing so. So there's a non-zero chance that the financial institutions as we know them will collapse. I don't know exactly when or how, but there's a decent chance that will happen. And so having Bitcoin is kind of a way to protect yourself and diversify it and protect yourself from that risk. Yes, Diane.
So I have two questions. First, tell us if you have functional machines in Sofia, so go there and do that, what you just proposed. And second, what about putting some of our money in gold as well? What is your
in gold?
Position on gold and silver and the old money?
Yes.
The old money.
Got ourselves a gold bug here. Okay. So Stoyan asked A, where can you find one of our machines in Sofia? And second of all, or in Bulgaria. And second, if I would suggest people invest in silver and gold as well. The first is there's currently one of our machines in Sofia. It's in the Interpred building. And it's been here for several years. And before we even arrived here, it was here. And so if you want to go and see our machine and use it, it's there. And silver and gold, I think it does have certain advantages, perhaps even over Bitcoin, as it's physical, right? So if everything the whole world shuts down, gold will still be there in its physical form. And so there probably is an advantage to holding gold and silver. You know, from a world-changing technological standpoint, I'm less excited about gold and silver, but I think it's a very good, boring investment. I think it's something that's probably important to have if everything else starts failing more. Yes?
Hello. Firstly, I'm sorry if I may have missed this essay late, but can you tell us something more about the supply of Bitcoin? Not only Bitcoin, but the other cryptocurrencies.
Right.
If you can draw a line between some of the main cryptocurrencies. And I'm interested because it is believed that as many other businesses, the production is a bit more sustainable than the trade. So I'm interested in, let's say, in digging, in mining.
In the mining of Bitcoin.
So can you tell us briefly about this?
Oh, oof. Okay, so the question is about the supply of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. And also if I could talk a little bit about mining, and what was the other part? Was that it?
The production.
Okay, so like creating the Bitcoins, and so that is mining.
Between the other cryptocurrencies and the Bitcoin. And does it work to mine Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency?
Okay, so starting with the first question, Bitcoin will only ever get up to 21 million Bitcoins. That is the hard limit. It's hard-coded into the software, and we're past the halfway point. We're probably about 14, 15 million now, if I'm not mistaken. And then over the next 100 years, it will slowly get to that point, where in the next probably about 20 years, it'll really slow down. So basically what you have is the first block. There is a block every 10 minutes on average in Bitcoin. And when Bitcoin first started, each one of those blocks came with a reward of 50 Bitcoins. So anybody that was mining these Bitcoins, that put in hard computing work in order to find these Bitcoins, would get 50 Bitcoins of that reward if they were able to find that block. And then every 4 years, it halves. So the 4 next years, it was 25. And now since we're into the third 4-year period, it's at 12.5, and in about 3 years it'll go down to 6.25, and so on and so forth. It'll just slow down more and more and more. So it's very transparent. Everybody knows exactly how many Bitcoins there will ever be. Everybody knows exactly at what rate they're manufactured. But mining isn't that simple, right? So mining, when Bitcoin just started, you could mine Bitcoins on your laptop. And you had your laptop on in 2009, 2010, you'd be doing very well right now. Of course, nobody knew that, and that's why you could mine with a laptop. It's because hardly anybody was doing it. And now there are huge industrial farms of computers and computers of specialized hardware just for mining Bitcoin called ASIC chips. And it's very, these are operations of hundreds of millions of dollars. And it's very, very expensive to get into these days and to compete. I personally have never really gotten into mining. I don't know how profitable it is, but I'm also not an expert on it. So I wouldn't be the one to ask is this a business that I should really get into? I've never researched it that much. I know a lot of people prefer to get into mining other cryptocurrencies because some of them share the same algorithms, and then you can move from one to the other depending on what's more profitable. And with Bitcoin, you can only really move between Bitcoin and now Bitcoin Cash because the Bitcoin Cash is a fork of Bitcoin. I can't give you a tremendous amount of detail of which cryptocurrency to mine. I know that there's at least one mining farm here in Sofia, and they will host your mining hardware for you for any cryptocurrency you'd like. So that might be a good way of getting started if you're interested in it. And I can probably give you more information about that afterwards. Yes?
So I'm sure you've heard this a lot.
Bitcoin, okay, it's a great thing, but the truly revolution is behind the blockchain technology. So we don't need the Bitcoin, we just can use the blockchain technology. So can you share with us why Bitcoin is so special compared to Goldman Sachs coin and Bulgarian National Bank coin?
Right. Well, see, that's the thing. I got an email from someone this week who, I think it was Blockchain Ireland or something. And I was talking about how banks and how they're not very friendly to Bitcoin businesses, surprise. And he's like, yeah, they're really into blockchain, but they're not sure about this Bitcoin thing. And so in a sense, it's like you see this huge, powerful new technology. And these businesses that kind of look at Bitcoin in the eyes, and it's got to be terrifying for them at this point. And they're like, well, we don't want to do this Bitcoin thing, but blockchains, we can maybe do something. We'll start a private blockchain, which is basically a glorified database. That's what they're getting excited about. Because obviously the best use case for a blockchain is a coin, is money. It's an amazing use case. So you can try to find all kinds of other, smart contracts and cute things to do, and some of them may actually be useful down the road. But nothing compares to the ability to have a completely new monetary and financial asset system without any middlemen whatsoever that's not controlled by a group of any of a company, corporation, or government. There's really nothing to compare. So it's kind of like I think they realize how dangerous it is. And on the one hand, they don't want to be left behind. They realize that as banks, they have to always look at the newest technologies. But it's just too hard for them to accept that it's Bitcoin. So they're kind of like, I can't do this Bitcoin thing, but fine, blockchain. Let's build something on this. And yes.
Let's go with this question. What do you think about blockchain money supported by government? For example, the Russian has attention.
Yes. Well, it's just a digital coin. I mean, if they were to launch a completely, a fork of Bitcoin, and then just let it go, then cool. Yeah, I'm for that if they don't have control over it. But if they have control over it, then it's not immutable. Then it doesn't have all of the super important properties about Bitcoin if they can change it. So the whole point is that if of a cryptocurrency is that it has nobody controlling it. And so governments don't usually like to do that sort of thing. The whole point where they'd want to have their own coin is because they would be able to have control over it. And then it's just maybe another way for them to say, hey, listen, you don't have to buy Bitcoin, buy our digital coin. We say it's okay to use this one. But as far as the actual value of the technology, it really is, it's kind of like a sterilized version of Bitcoin. It's not a real cryptocurrency. It's not a distributed cryptocurrency. And therefore, to me at least, it's not that interesting. I would say that it would be better than the current money they have now if it just works better as a technology. If it's easier to trade, if there are better apps to use, it might be friendlier to use. But it's not going to be groundbreaking. Yes?
Is Bitcoin a bubble?
Is Bitcoin a bubble?
Because there are people who think the current valuation is too high.
Mm-hmm. Well, people were saying it was a bubble at $30. People were saying it was a bubble at $100. People were saying it was a bubble at $1,000. And then it actually did pop, and it went down to $200. And then people again were saying it was a bubble at $2,000 and $5,000. It might be a bubble, but how do you know something's a bubble? Well, after it pops. So we'll see. Maybe Bitcoin will, at 8,000 will crash down to 5,000. Will that be a bubble? I don't know. I mean, so it's kind of hard to it's kind of hard to ask the question of, is Bitcoin a bubble if it over time just keeps going up? And if you think the technology is powerful enough and you actually believe in the technology, then it's going to be a matter of what it actually achieves. And the price itself, as I said, is to me a little less interesting. So it might be a bubble right now, but with the way that
excuse me.
Yes.
What do they mean by is Bitcoin a bubble? Do they mean like stocks, like housing?
Like dot-com bubble, yeah.
like currency.
Like the tulip bubble?
Yeah, like so everything in economy so far has had the tendency to become a bubble at some point. Whether it's
I'm asking about right now with Bitcoin.
You mean the price right now?
Yeah.
It could crash. Let's put it that way. It could easily crash. And I think that, the people have been in Bitcoin long enough are used to it. So the price is, it's going to go up and down all the time. But if you kind of see it, it's up and down. It's still exponential growth. So it will go up and down and up and down. It's just like waves. They're going to crash, and then you'll get another wave. So the main question is are you actually going to have mainstream adoption of Bitcoin? Are you going to get to a system where people actually don't go to open banks? They don't need to open a bank account. Why? Because what are they going to do with the bank account? They don't need it. They can pay with Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies. They can store their money in Bitcoin. They don't need to store it in a bank. And so that's kind of what at least the true believers of Bitcoin want to get to the point where you don't need banks. You don't need the stock markets. You don't need all of these financial and centralized institutions because you have everything in cryptocurrency. And so if that happens, then the price now is nothing. It will get up to, whatever the price. It won't even matter anymore because the dollar won't have the same value. So what does it matter that, Bitcoin is $10 million if nobody's really using the dollar as much? Yes?
So doesn't it mean that the current fluctuations are, you could say technically a bubble because they're not based on using the currency as much as a currency, rather speculating on it. And say if people start adopting it as a means of exchange, then it wouldn't be called bubble because it would naturally start growing more and more.
Right. So there are a few things. Overall, Bitcoin's volatility over the years is actually going down. It doesn't always feel like it, but that is what is happening. And at the same time, you're right that Bitcoin isn't being used as a currency, and especially with the really high transaction fees that we're seeing now, it's hard to use it as a currency. I just bought a burger at Skaptobara. They have a Satoshi burger, and the Bitcoin fee for the burger was $2. So that's a lot to pay for buying a burger. And so right now it's not really being used as an everyday currency. Right now it is used for speculation. People think it's going to be a currency, or people think it's going to be a store of value, and they think it's going to be something bigger, and therefore they're putting money into it, or a lot of that and add on to a lot of other people who just see the price going up and investing in it. So yes, it's very possible that right now the price will crash, because there are a lot of people that will be very affected by movements of the market. So if it all of a sudden goes down to 6,000, there are going to be a lot of people that panic sell because they don't want to lose everything. And you have to be a huge Bitcoin believer to be able to hodl or hold on for dear life as it goes down, 80% or 90%, and just hold on to it because you believe that one day it will go right back up. And so I think that, a lot of the people that invest in it just because they think they're going to get rich have historically been burned by that. Unless by some mistake they held on to it even so. And so it's very possible the price will go down and then go up and then go down again. But it's also kind of part of the process. Part of the price going up introduces people to Bitcoin. Because the fundamentals of Bitcoin weren't enough on their own to excite people, but the price was. But then once they get into Bitcoin, then maybe they'll get more excited about it. Once you have Bitcoin, then maybe you start rooting for it a bit more. So there are certain, I think, advantages of there being a high price. I just don't necessarily think that's the most interesting thing about Bitcoin. Yes, Kadi.
How secure is to keep Bitcoin at your Bitcoin wallet in terms of security about?
It depends what your Bitcoin wallet is. If your Bitcoin wallet is your phone, and you don't have a password on your phone or on your wallet, and you just leave it on the table, then it's as secure as cash would be if you just put it on the table and left. But if you secure your Bitcoin with, several keys, and one of them's in a safe in Switzerland, and one of them's in the safe in Iceland, and the other one in Dubai, then it's probably pretty secure. So it really, it gives you a lot of control, but it's also something that's kind of hard for people to worry about. And that's one of the problems with Bitcoin right now is, be your own bank. It's like, okay, but I don't have safes like a bank. And so what do I do? And that's something that I think Bitcoin has to overcome to become more mainstream, is how do we make it very easy for people to secure their own Bitcoins? But, it's getting better. You have hardware wallets such as the Trezor or the Ledger Nano S that are easy to use and secure and overall secure. But then it's just a matter of, how much money you want to store in that and what you think the risk, how paranoid you want to be.
You mentioned that there were $250 billion worth of Bitcoins in circulation.
Of crypto, the market cap of crypto. All crypto.
160.
Anyway, so what part of that is actually being traded every single day? Because the FX market is $5 trillion worth, but the world money supply is much greater than 5.3 trillion, as much as it's being traded. So essentially, what's the volatility of the Bitcoin trade as a share of the whole thing?
That's a good question. I don't know. You'd have to look at the different exchanges and how much they're trading every day, and you can get an idea. I think CoinCap.io will show you how much each coin is how much past 24 trading on past 24 hours. It'll give you a general idea of how much is actually being traded and used on the different cryptocurrencies. It changes. So sometimes you'll have Ethereum will actually have more transactions than Bitcoin in a day. But I don't have a great answer for that. It's a good question, though.
Well, apparently it's just 6 billion out of 160 billion worth of Bitcoins. So
that's every 24 hours. Every day.
Yeah. Well, that's what we need essentially.
Yeah.
So it's like 6% of the whole.
Okay.
Yeah, which I think kind of like beats the FX market by a small margin, because your grandma doesn't trade her dollars or rubles or whatever. She just puts them in the jar bank.
Well, yeah. It's not a bad idea. Saving. Yes.
What is your opinion on the Bitcoin block size debate?
Oh man, you should. Okay, so that you should come on Wednesday. There's going to be a Bitcoin meetup, and there's actually going to be debate of me and a few guys against some other guys of on-chain scaling versus off-chain scaling. And I personally believe that on-chain scaling is preferable, but it's a really long debate, and we'll get into it another time.
Can you just explain in simple terms, like, what's the difference between the two technologies?
Okay, so the core problem with Bitcoin right now, and the reason that the fees are so high, is its bandwidth issue. There are more transactions happening. There is more demand than supply. Right? So the prices go up. And so the question is, what do we do about this bandwidth? So the people that believe in on-chain scaling say, well, that's an easy question. You only have 1 megabyte of bandwidth right now. Let's make it 8. And then you can have more throughput, and everybody's happy. And then the off-chainers say, well, yes, you can do that, but it's going to affect the stability and the security of the entire system. And this is Bitcoin. We don't want to mess with it. So the best way to do it is to leave it at more or less 1, 2, 3 megabytes with different technology and build another layer over that. And that layer is going to be really good for all kinds of microtransactions. And you can do all of the smaller transactions on that top layer. And then every once in a while you can settle it. When it really needs to be settled, you settle it on the blockchain that has 1, 2, 3 megabytes worth of bandwidth. And those really important ones will get verified properly. And when you're just sending somebody $2 here or $5 here, you don't need that same kind of level of security that you do when you really want to use Bitcoin for the important things, like making sure nobody can, but yourself, can access your money. Stan, yes.
So I want to ask about the political ramifications. So,
okay.
my first question is, how do you see if the system is really going to break down because of Bitcoin? How do you see that happening? And my position is that it's going to be a good thing, but what are the steps? What is the final end position when we have this breakdown of the banking system as it is, of all those fractionalism decentralized systems. Actually, the last time we had a conversation about gold, Dimo from Talis basically said that there is fractional reserve gold. Also, there is a video on recent TV where a lady who is into the Bitcoin startup scene says that there is fractional reserve securities. So there is a lot of fractional reserve stuff now going on.
Right.
How do you see this breaking down? And what is in your head? Again, this is speculation, but what will happen? That's my first question. Second question is, you said, I'm not sure if we need a lot of new think tanks, which is kind of what my position is on the libertarian organizations. But then, what do you think do we need in terms of that? What kind of activism do we need if we are going into the Bitcoin era? Do we need just new companies trying to take over stuff that the state did in the past? Or do we need actual organizational PLS, people? So
Right. So for the first question, I really hope it happens gradually over time. So I wouldn't want to see a situation where there's a huge failure and then people have to figure out oh no, how do I get my money? There's like a bank run, right? If you have a bank run and people can't get their money, then it's already too late for them. If they've had 10, 20 years to kind of prepare for it and see that things are slowly getting worse, then they'll say, okay, I'm going to put 10% into Bitcoin, I'm going to put another 20%, oh, things are really looking bad, and Bitcoin's looking better. Ideally, that's the way it would happen. Because otherwise, obviously, people are going to get hurt. Of course, people would get hurt anyway. Now you just have that lifeboat that is Bitcoin that you can kind of hold on to if everything's sinking. And so the way I expect it to happen is I expect to see more and more crashes over time, right? So something similar to 2008, but repeated. And since the last crash happened, last real crash happened in 2008, well, you didn't have Bitcoin back then. So I'd be really interested to see if the next crash, not that I hope there's another crash, of course, but if there is, to see how people's reaction to Bitcoin is then. Because if you look at some other places in the world, you look at Venezuela, you look at Zimbabwe, where they've had some pretty bad situations there, and people did start getting into Bitcoin, but it's not like everybody all of a sudden started using Bitcoin and that's it, problem solved. So it's, I think it's either way, if you have a crash of the existing system, it's going to be bad and people are going to get hurt. I think it's a really positive thing that you now have this alternative that can help save some people or some part of people's wealth. And I think if it happens gradually enough, then people won't be hurt as much. And your second question was about what kind of activism you do and what should libertarians do to get more into Bitcoin. And so talking about it is always great. Using it, showing it to friends, that's just kind of like small-time activism. The best thing is to start a business and to try to find a way to, yes, replace what people, something that people are getting from government, and replace it with something productive. And I think that's something that is actually starting to happen. And I think part of I'm not a huge fan of this whole ICO frenzy. But I think if there's something positive about it, is that there is a lot of money going into teaching people how to program and how to be developers for Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. And what you're going to get out of that over the years is you're going to get a lot of people who are really good at building products for cryptocurrency or other kinds of crypto projects, even blockchain projects. And eventually those things can start replacing all kinds of different parts that are currently required with today's institutions, perhaps even accountants and lawyers. So that's the kind of thing that I would like to see over the next 10, 15 years, is how these things are slowly replaced with decentralized systems. Yes?
I have a question about the creator of Bitcoin.
Satoshi? Okay.
It is important for you who is Satoshi Nakamoto, because many people have a question about that.
I would say I'd say it's important to me that it is never discovered. That's what I hope.
Because many people say that intelligence, virtual intelligence, this kind kind of group of people or aliens?
It could be aliens. I mean, that would make as much sense as any of the other theories. I don't know. It's a very impressive project. I kind of hope it stays a secret. It's a lot more fun that way, and then people don't... One of the problems with Ethereum is that everybody's kind of concentrating on Vitalik all the time. And it's kind of like, oh, it's Vitalik's coin. Oh, look, Vitalik said something. Why can you trust Ethereum? And so I think it's, in a sense, it's good that it's left up to our imaginations of who or what Satoshi is. And I hope it stays that way. Yes?
Yeah, I agree with you, just it's a bit more funnier that way, but nevertheless, I believe that this is maybe the most fundamental thing about a currency. Who stands behind this currency? And to elaborate even more, what is the fundamental and economic reason, and where exactly goes all of the electricity which is used in order to produce Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrencies, let's say Ethereum. Because Ethereum, we're not talking about Ethereum, but Ethereum is maybe half the volume of Bitcoin, so it's pretty significant on the market. Market capitalization even more, around, I believe, 20 billion. So what's the economics behind?
Well, the power and the energy all goes into securing the system. That's what it's about.
Security.
Securing the system, yes. So it's harder to hack.
Because there are some speculations and conspiracy theories for that this electricity is being used as a means of calculation, which are used in different spheres, let's say.
But then somebody else would start a company that only did mining and got a lot more money. So it does. I think that those people don't really understand the fundamentals of mining, or perhaps economics. But all of that energy is spent in order to get the reward, on the one hand, as far as the miners are concerned. As far as Bitcoin is concerned, it's consuming that energy to create more security to the system. So what are these computers doing? They're computing harder and harder problems all of the time. Why is it important to have the difficulty of the problems to get harder? Because if you have somebody from the outside trying to attack the system, you want to make it harder for them. And so if you want to secure the system against, say, either huge state actors or corporations or something, you need a tremendous amount of power to protect against that. And right now, Bitcoin is so incredibly powerful that it is impossible for anybody to attack it in that way right now. And it's just getting stronger and stronger and stronger every single day.
How do we know this?
It's all completely open source software. So if you know how to read that, you can go ahead and check it yourself. And if you don't, you can pay somebody to help you understand it. But that's part of the beauty. You really don't have to know who Satoshi is. All of the software is out there. Everything's been put out there. He wrote a few things in the beginning, and it's easy to see what his motivation was before. You just, as I started to talk by saying, there's that Genesis block where it's all about getting, taking this power away from the banks and the big corporations and this kind of like too big to fail mentality. Yes?
Back when the last big crash in the price of Bitcoin happened in early 2014, it was because a Bitcoin exchange was hacked.
Right.
MT-Gov.
Yes.
Yeah. So is there a danger of that happening again and causing another crash? Could it happen again? Is it possible?
So yes, and first of all, an exchange can definitely crash. An exchange can definitely get hacked. And that's something that anybody that's interested in putting a little bit of money into Bitcoin should remember. Exchanges are not for holding your funds. They're for buying or selling. Holding your funds is up to you. And what's happened to people in the past is they got, whether it's hard for me to call it laziness because it really is hard to secure the coins. But people didn't want to put the time in or figure out or trust themselves enough to do that. And then they left it in the exchange. And a lot of people still do leave their coins in the exchange, and then if they get hacked, they're lost forever. So you trust the exchange more than yourself, and that's not necessarily a good idea unless you have zero trust in yourself and you don't care. It's just like, I know I'm going to do a shitty job and lose it, so I'll just put it on the exchange and hope for the best. But on the crashing side, you have a lot of exchanges these days. And the price, and you also have a lot more money into Bitcoin. So it's harder to manipulate the market. It's harder to make the market crash. It doesn't mean it won't happen. It just means it's harder. So it used to be that any small thing would completely move the market. You know, there was some announcement on the news and Bitcoin would go up 30%. Bad news, it would go down, 30%. And now that the fluctuations are a lot more timid. They're a lot slower because it's no longer a $20 million market. It's a $160 billion market. So it takes a lot more to move it. The panicking is not noticed just as much. So I don't think that the collapse of an exchange will lead to Bitcoin crashing. Though, it depends if Coinbase goes down, for example, and is completely hacked, which I honestly don't expect, then maybe it could move the market in some way. But I don't think that would have the same effect as Mt. Gox, because remember when Mt. Gox crashed, it was pretty much the only exchange on the market, and that was the price of Bitcoin. Actually, no, that was the first crash of Mt. Gox. When that happened, they had no competition. The second time around, there was already Coinbase and Bitstamp. But Mt. Gox was only kind of like the very beginning of it. And it also had to do with the whole Silk Road thing. So all kind of crashing down together.
I know they had a much bigger market share back then. As far as I know, there's not a single exchange that has as big of a market share as Mt. Gox has back then.
Right. That's also true. Yes. It was, yes?
You mentioned securing your coins again, and that brought to my mind the notion that banks don't only provide transactional services, they also provide security in both securing your money from thieves and also security from losing it to inflation. So don't you think that if Bitcoin actually becomes a globally accepted common currency, banks will start having savings accounts in Bitcoins and also fractional reserve Bitcoins?
Well, if they want to have fractional reserve Bitcoins and they want to have some kind of contract with their customers, as long as it's transparent, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. It's just basically what you're saying is invest my Bitcoins for me. So I don't have a problem with that as a service. I also don't have a problem as a service if they're custody. You're saying, listen, this is what we're offering you for the security of your Bitcoins. Give them to us. We'll even insure them up to some point. I think that could be a good idea for banks to get into, as their the services they provide today may no longer exist in 10 to 15 years or so. So I do think that it's something that banks could get into, that banks would be good at. I don't see them talking about it yet, but I don't see any problem with, call it a bank or security service, whatever you will, private entities securing your funds, be it Bitcoin, gold, or anything.
But if you have a fractional reserve of Bitcoin, will that be the purpose? Will there be an inflation?
Well, because they're not. It's not fractional reserve of Bitcoin. It's fractional reserve of your holding. So what you're basically saying is, I'm giving you 10 Bitcoins. They can't, and then they could go invest that money and not always have it, to give to you, back to you. It's not really fractional reserve in the banking sense of it, right? You can't. They can't. Right. They can't do, and they can't create more Bitcoins out of those Bitcoins you give them. They can take them and invest them and do whatever they want, and not always have them available for you if that's the contract you have with them. Kind of like a savings account in a sense. But that's another problem with the exchanges, that there are some concerns about exchanges that have been hacked in the past if they have as many Bitcoins as they say they have. Because the exchanges aren't on the blockchain, they have a regular database, right? And they're saying, well, here are all the Bitcoins we have, and if somebody stole 20% of those and they want to stay in business, then, fudging that might be a good way to stay in business. So there is a concern. That's another concern about putting your coins on an exchange. If they're not trustworthy enough, they may not have all of the Bitcoins they say they have. And then just like a regular bank run, if all of a sudden everybody goes to get their Bitcoins out, they'll run out before you get yours.
So that's how you get a fractional reserve Bitcoin to the exchanges.
Yeah, go to exactly. You can always go to a centralized entity for your fractional reserve. It's just the distributed ledger that's so easy to audit that can never happen.
So, do we have more questions?
Yes, there's one question over here.
You mentioned ICOs.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about altcoins? Because
12,000 now.
Right, so there are altcoins and ICOs, and then altcoins are basically any cryptocurrency that's not Bitcoin. Of course, depending who you ask, the original altcoins were just basically clones of Bitcoin with a different name and something else, because that was what was cool in 2014. And then over time, they started becoming a little bit more interesting and complex. New ideas like Ethereum and Monero and Zcash. So you still have a lot of different altcoins, which, to varying success. And then you have ICOs, which is something completely different. And ICOs are usually, not always, usually built off of Ethereum tokens, and it's really an easy way, or at least it was early on, to get your idea funded without having to go through venture capital. And there's all this excitement around it because all of a sudden anybody could invest in a new business. So you have these guys coming out with business, with like white papers and these fancy websites, and this is what we're going to do, and this is what we're going to do. And then like in the first half an hour of their sale, they brought in like $100 million or something ridiculous.
Like silly stories of like fading companies repackaging themselves as a cryptocurrency company and then seeing their stock price skyrocket.
Yes.
There was the added
makes sense.
blockchain to the company.
Well, that's something else.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So obviously what happens, then everybody's like, oh my God, this is how we get our money for our business. And then, so that worked for a few months.
So it's blockchain
About these altcoins, one of them changed the Bitcoin as a leader of cryptocurrencies?
Well, maybe. I guess it would really depend on what they're offering the market, and they'd have to beat out the network effect of Bitcoin. So it's possible that either Bitcoin really starts faltering and losing support, or it's possible that there's some really genuinely brilliant technology that does everything that Bitcoin does and way better, and it convinces everybody that it's better than Bitcoin, and then people will start moving over to it. It's possible. I don't think it's very likely in the near term, but it's definitely possible.
Excuse me, I'm going to name he who must not be named. George Soros has bragged about breaking the Bank of England. Is it possible for someone to do the same with Bitcoin?
It would take a lot more money.
More money than the Bank of England?
Yes, at this point, probably. What do you need to break the Bank of England? I mean, you could probably come up with some good schemes,
Pounds.
Find some kind of, what?
I guess you need to sell a lot of pounds that you
Right, so you have to ask, how are you going to attack Bitcoin? Then you have to come up with a good plan, and then you have to see how much it's going to cost you, and it's going to cost you a very, very high sum of money. And then even so, what do you get from it? If it's clear that you're the person trying to break Bitcoin, then the whole community can say, okay, we're changing something about Bitcoin. And then all the money that you could just fork Bitcoin, and then all the money that you as an individual put into it would just be lost and useless, and Bitcoin would just keep going as if nothing happened. So I think it's not a very good idea to attack Bitcoin. I don't think it'll work. And even if it does succeed, you have all these other altcoins that are ready to take its place. So that's really, it's whack-a-mole, I guess.
Yeah. And anyway, he who must not be named would paint a target on his back doing so, right?
Well, I don't know who you're asking. Yes.
I have a question about hard forks and the threat they pose to multiplying the money supply of bitcoins. How do you see all the different bitcoins that are emerging right now? Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin Gold. Are they a threat to the system? Or?
I guess it really depends who you ask. I mean, in some ways, people are saying that the Bitcoin Cash guys are attacking Bitcoin. Guys like Roger Ver will say that the Bitcoin core developers are attacking Bitcoin, and Bitcoin Cash is the real Bitcoin. So it's almost like a political question in a sense. I don't, it's hard to say what will actually. I don't think Bitcoin Gold is a threat to anything at this point. And I think that it's more likely that Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash will live beside each other than one competing over the other. But it really depends what happens in the future. It really depends. If Bitcoin fees go to $100 or $200 per transaction, then it's going to be used for less things than it has been in the past. And then those things that it's no longer being used for, perhaps Bitcoin Cash and Zcash and Ethereum and Dash will take its place. But it's, there's some people talking about Bitcoin as gold and the other altcoins as silver. It's possible that will happen. Or it's possible that people will start, once they start using these other coins, will say, well, actually, it's pretty good for storing things as well. Why do I need to put it into Bitcoin? But I think that's something that will really develop over the next, 5-10 years or so. I don't think it's something that's going to happen very quickly. Yes?
Because you already mentioned that you believe that Bitcoin is quite invincible in terms of faith of the people in cryptocurrency.
Mm-hmm.
Apart from the faith, what do you think that is the competitive advantage of Bitcoin against the other cryptocurrencies?
Well, for one, the clear thing is it was first to market and it has the brand name of being Bitcoin. And that's a huge advantage for right now. It has the network effect. And it has the stability that people can rely on it. It's been around for 9 years now, and it has never been hacked. It is people can trust it and can rely on it. And with these other coins that have been around for a lot less time, they're not as proven, and they don't have all the other things such as being recognized, being first to market, and the network effect, in a sense, and the brand name that Bitcoin has. So again, it's possible that over, the next 5, 10, 15 years, some other technology that comes out that's better than Bitcoin in every way, and everybody recognizes that. And if that's the case, then fine. It's whatever's best for cryptocurrency and whatever serves the people best. It's just something that I don't think will happen overnight, and I think will take a while before people are really convinced that is the case, and it's not just some new technology that's trying to do too much but doesn't really have the security that's required for running a $100, $200 or $1 trillion, billion or $1 trillion economy.
What about the anonymity?
Yes.
Anonymity factor. Could that prove to be a competitive advantage for certain coins over Bitcoin?
I think so. I think some of the Bitcoin developers are working on some ideas to make Bitcoin more anonymous. But Bitcoin isn't anonymous as of now. It's pseudonymous. In fact, there are all kinds of ways to monitor the Bitcoin blockchain and find out all kinds of terrible things about people and where their money's been.
Do you think it's more anonymous in the future?
It's definitely moving into the direction of being more anonymous. Yes, I mean you already have. For Bitcoin, you have Mimblewimble. Then you have Monero. You have Zcash. Dash is more anonymous than Bitcoin. And so you have all of these technologies that are kind of, there is kind of a race to anonymity. And it's something that already exists on a certain level. I personally am most excited about Zcash, and I think that it just has, as far as the core technology behind it and the team that they have and their roadmap, I think it's going to be a really fantastic coin and be absolutely anonymous. To the point that all you see is kind of a number of a transaction, but you can't know anything about that. And you don't know the amount, obviously you don't know names, but you don't know the amount, you don't know the addresses, there's absolutely nothing you can see about it. And so I think that's going to be used more and more for just general transactions. And I mean, people have always wanted to hide their money, whether you're an individual or whether you're a business. I mean, it's important for doing business as well. So I think that there are a lot of good reasons, besides even I don't want the government to see what I'm spending my money on, there are a lot of good reasons to be private and to have privacy. And I think that that's a really important feature in a coin. And so I think that people are going to be more interested in those. And Bitcoin is either going to have to compete with that by improving its technology to be more anonymous, or people will start using these anonymous coins a lot more. Yes?
What about security in terms of national governments, let's say? Obviously, the majority of us here are either interested or like Bitcoin and would like to use it as a currency, let's say, in the near future. But what if the government put an embargo or forbid us, or not us, but maybe the major traders worldwide to use Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies as means of exchange,
right?
As some of the lead traders have started. So, can you tell us briefly?
Yeah. So it's a good question. The question is, what if the governments decide to ban all businesses that deal with Bitcoin? So what the governments can't do is they can't stop one individual of sending Bitcoin to another. Nobody can stop a Bitcoin transaction, but they can go and say, well, you're a registered business. You're a registered business. We can say that it's illegal for you to use Bitcoin, and if you do, you're going to either pay a fine or go to jail. If they could do that, it would just push it more underground, and there's already a lot of demand for Bitcoin. So it would just create more of a black market. It's like, well, you know, what if governments decide that they don't like a plant like cannabis, right? How are they going to stop it? Oh, well, they'll just tell all the businesses not to, that they can't use cannabis anymore, and then nobody will use cannabis. Obviously, that hasn't happened. So the only thing they can do is they can push it more and more underground, and by doing so, create more violence in the trade, which I hope does not happen. But that's really the only trick they have up their sleeves is to push something from an open market and free market into a black market.
So now I'm just going to stop the questions because
Okay.
Scott has been talking for more than an hour.
Oh, really?
He's here to drink.
Yes.
So if you want to ask more questions, he'll be around.
Yes.
And he doesn't have to stand there and just answer without being here. So let's thank him.
Thank you.